Hello and welcome to the 100% Cricket Show, where we're going to take a deep dive into women's cricket, where it's at the moment and where does it need to go for it to keep thriving in this global market. Now, to help me in this discussion, we've been able to assemble a stellar crew that have had years of experience within the game. To start off with, Clare Connor,
former England captain, and I hate to say a winning Ashes captain, also the managing director of women's cricket at the ECB, and
soon to be president
of the MCC. Welcome, Clare. Is that still surreal to even hear that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge honour to become the first female president of the MCC. I've got a lot of time to get my head around it because I don't start till next October. So I think hopefully the shock will pass and I'll be able to use that time really wisely to think about how I can really help and make the most of the year in that role.
Well, our next guest joining us is probably the friendliest giant that I've ever come across. He is also the voice of cricket, really, and we're excited that he's also playing an important role within the women's game. Mr. Ian Bishop, nice to see you.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. Hello, Claire. How are you? And hello to everyone.
Bish, you must be enjoying this bio bubble. You go from your hotel to the cricket ground and you don't interact with anyone else and you get to sleep the rest of the time. Perfect.
It's been well publicized that biosecure cricket and quarantine suits me down to the ground, so I have no complaints whatsoever. You very well.
Look, we're not just going to have a bunch of has-beens that are going to discuss the women's game. We're also going to have a current player, and she is the highest run scorer in the ODI format. She is the current captain of the Indian women's one-day side, and she's also 100% cricket ambassador, Mithali Raj. Mithali, it's nice to have you.
Thank you.
How has lockdown been for you? But more importantly, the uncertainty of not knowing when your next tour is, or your next tournament, or even your next camp.
Well, I think there's been this anxiety about what's the future, what are the future tournaments, because right now we don't even know for what we are training. There needs to be a purpose. Like before, we used to plan for any international series if it is away going, so accordingly players would prepare, and if it's a home series, we prepare accordingly. But now we don't know why we train. So there is sometimes we do feel that there is no sense of purpose if we don't have competitive cricket or any international series, even domestic for that matter. But one positive is that things are slowly improving in terms of access to the facilities. But again, there are few changes in terms of all the training facilities work on time slots. Like earlier we would just walk in and start batting, or we would have some good 10 to 15 net bowlers where we can bat for good 1-2 hours. But now you have to go into the time slot that you're given, and maybe the net bowlers are reduced to just 2-3 of them. And so these are the changes that as current players now we are sort of accepting it. And but I think having an optimism that at some point we will have matches, and that is why all of us are still into our fitness training, trying to keep up to the standard that we were before the lockdown.
Claire, it must have been an absolutely trying time for you and obviously the ECB. So been discussed about your summer of cricket, your new format starting, but you've been able to get some women's cricket back on the park as well.
Yeah, look, it's of course it's been challenging. It's hit us right at the start really of the English summer or spring. But you keep some perspective on all of this. It is just cricket after all. But we love it, and everyone's been working unbelievably hard to get it back on. No more so than Steve Alworthy and his team, and everybody at Emirates Old Trafford and the Ageas Bowl to first of all get the international men's programme played. And huge credit, obviously, to West Indies men and Pakistan and Australia and Ireland for their part in that. it's been a completely new ground, learning how to set up a biosecure environment for players and officials and media and so on. So, in a way, it's been exciting, and people have been learning and innovating, and hopefully we can share all of that knowledge with others around the world. And, now the T20 leagues are up and running in the men's game. For the women's game, it's been frustrating because we were due to host India and South Africa women this summer. And one by one they fell away for different reasons, really, but in the main because of travel restrictions, because of the pandemic. So, but we've been resolute in we knew the importance of that visibility. You mentioned in your opening there the women's T20 World Cup final on March the 8th, and that amazing day, which was broadcast around the world, and 1.1 billion views, I think, digital views, showing what an amazing product and appetite there is for international women's cricket. So we knew we had to get some international women's cricket on this summer, and we're really thankful again to the West Indies women who, within a 14-day kind of period, we spent 14 days once we realised South Africa couldn't come, working with the West Indies Cricket Board pretty much every day to make that happen. And we're looking forward to that series starting on the 21st of September. Be live on Sky with one game simulcast live on the BBC, so free-to-air television, Saturday the 26th of September, which is brilliant for us. So look, there's obviously been huge challenges. For us, we've been lucky. There's been no financial challenge because the ECB board, stated at the beginning of this that whatever it took to get international men's cricket played would be applied to the international women's game. So that was really important, knowing that we had no real financial constraints. We just needed to get someone over. So we've been lucky in that regard.
Yeah, it's really exciting. England versus West Indies. Australia and New Zealand are about to start their internationals. Ian Bishop, you spoke about a couple of months ago saying that, men's game has already, but where is the women's game? Have you felt that it's been a little bit too late?
Ideally, it would have been great to have it done earlier. But when I heard the West Indies were going to pop over to England, they were invited to England, and they took up the opportunity. It was great because I was having a couple of chats with a couple of members of the team in interviews previously before we knew that was going to happen. It was difficult, as it is with any cricketer, to know when to train, how hard to train, what do you look forward to, how do you set goals. So it really was a gift from above when we heard that the West Indies women would be invited to England. It gave them some financial or revenue income, and you don't want an absence of cricket for too long, because for any player, they're going to feel they're going to leave the game, they're going to look for other employment, and that is human resource drifting around out of the game. So I'm very, very happy that the ECB invited the West Indies women over. I know it's going to be safe because we had the experience of the men in the bubble, so there are no issues there. As Claire said, Steve Elworthy has done an excellent job, a top-class job, and he has created a template for everyone else to follow. We followed it in the CPL just this past few weeks, and it was quite nice.
You mentioned the CPL, Bish, and I wanted to kind of touch on that because that was a lot of cricket just jammed into a small amount of time. We've got the WBBL, the Women's Big Bash, that will start in mid-October. They're looking at 59 games over the course of 5 weeks. What can we expect from players having a huge amount of cricket from really not playing or not potentially training as much as they would have liked, then all of a sudden being crammed into so much cricket in such a short amount of time?
Well, you always have to be very aware of the pace at which you start your training sessions and stuff. But I think we have enough sports science in the game now to take care of that. For example, we had players flying in from all around the globe to the CPL. They were locked and isolated for a week, and then they started their limited preparations. And I think throughout the tournament, apart from a niggle here or niggle there, we didn't have any serious injuries. So once the highly trained and respected medical staff look after the players well, I think the players are keen to get on with it. Injuries will happen, but I don't think we saw any incidents in the test series in England to a large extent, nor in the CPL. So I think people are well tuned to the workloads that are going to be apparent to them, and it should go off well.
Is there an avenue, or is there an opportunity as the one-day captain of the Indian side to speak to the administrators, potentially the board as well, to provide your insight, your wealth of experience and knowledge about how does women's cricket get out of this pandemic, and how do you keep forward? Because the Indian side has been building nicely. Obviously, 2017, you were in the World Cup final. Just recently, the T20 World Cup final. So you're not that far away from an ICC. But things need to be happening, don't they?
Yes, I believe so, and we do have regular calls with the BCCI officials to see how what we can plan in the future. But again, a lot of these itineraries depend on the situation in the country. Say, like in India, it is still there is a lot of cases which which are we are actually on a rise in terms of the cases. So it is very difficult for the board to again get the girls going, because all of us come from different parts of the country, and it is sort of, there is some amount of risk traveling, and getting so many girls to have a camp is again something BCCI definitely is looking into, trying to organize, if they can, maybe a series or some sort of camp in terms of fitness, so that the girls regroup again. It is very important, because I understand that there's been a huge gap, say from the T20 World Cup in March, and now we are into September, so there's good 4 5 months of gap. And we have been in touch with the support staff and the players on calls, but again, it's important that we sort of gel only when we meet. And I've seen that, the WBBL is happening on time, but again with a bit of rules and regulations, because safety is paramount. West Indies is in England for a series, so let's see how these things get on, and probably that probably will give us some idea of organizing an international series in the coming months for India.
Claire, you mentioned that this year, for the first time since I think 1993, will be the first women's game telecast on free to air. How big a moment is that for women's cricket, especially in England?
Yeah, it's huge, really huge. And, it's a Saturday afternoon. We've seen some amazing viewing figures, I think, for the return of women's sport around the world. It's been happening slowly. We saw amazing live TV audiences. I think the opening match of the National Women's Soccer League in the States had an average, a higher TV audience than the equivalent men's game. So, putting that game, that third T20 on the BBC against the West Indies is huge for us. We've obviously had to postpone the start of the 100, the new competition for men and women that was due to start this summer. That was another massive opportunity for the women's game, because that was going to bring, obviously our Sky coverage, but also free to air BBC as well. So that's, we've lost out on that for this year. So I'm thrilled that we can get a game on the BBC. The following day, on September the 27th, we'll also see the final of our new domestic competition that we managed to launch this summer, the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy. We've called it for this season anyway. The final of that game will be on Sky. So that weekend we've got a bit of a kind of a women's cricket takeover to end the season, which was kind of the beacon that we were all sort of aiming for when it was getting harder and harder, it felt, to get anything to happen. So yeah, it's, we've seen when women's sport's been played on the BBC, whether it's women's hockey or football, the audiences are in their millions. So, it'll be, hopefully it'll be 1-1 or whatever by that stage, and it'll be a thrilling opportunity. So really looking forward to that.
Bish, Claire mentioned about the football and the viewership numbers, which is a positive signs for women's sport coming out of this pandemic. Do you think it's related to the fact of where the women's game is going, or is it the fact that in this pandemic, live sport was grounded for so many months and everyone's just got a real appetite for it and they're willing to watch anything? What's your take on that?
I would argue a bit of both, Lisa. I would argue that what we saw in March, what we saw in 2017 with the World Cup final between England and India at Lords in the women's game, what we saw in the T20 World Cup in your homeland at the MCG was a head of steam building, and consumers accepting that the women's game as a standalone event was entertainment enough in its own right and didn't have to piggyback off anything else. So there's a great respect. You double that up now with a captive audience with so many people around the world at home, um, and really hand chomping at the bit to have some live sport. How many Zoom interviews did we do over the not too many Zoom interviews and reruns of old games? We had enough of that. So we wanted to have the unpredictability of live sport, not knowing the outcomes. And I think that in itself has created a perfect storm. That if we capitalize on that from the women's game point of view, I watch a lot of basketball. I really do. And I enjoy both men's and women's basketball. So I'm telling you, as a consumer, this is the perfect time to push forward. And as Claire said, that game on the BBC, with all due respect to pay TV, when you have free to air sport or free to air television promoting sport, the reach is so much more, and you create an appetite in young kids to pick the game up. So I love it.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I think a prime example is you look at the T20 World Cup final. The fact that the Women's Big Bash League had been running, for 3-4 years prior to that on free-to-air TV, the general public, the Australian public, knew a lot of the stars and came there as a captive audience, not just there for the thrill of Katy Perry or anything. They wanted to see their heroes. So free-to-air TV is certainly massive.
You touched on mental health, and we've seen, because of the professionalism of the women's game accelerate. Obviously, Indian contracted players, that's your job, is to play cricket and to train for cricket. So there's no other outlet, or there's nothing else to kind of keep you occupied. So how is mental health being looked at from BCCI point of view? And do you have concerns going into a bio bubble where literally you stay in your room, go to the ground, and that's it? There's hardly any. You can't go out shopping. Can't go out to beautiful restaurants. How do you think that's going to affect the female players?
Well, as you said, that since we're contracted players, that's a job. So being in the bubble, if that is what it is, gets us going in terms of the matches, then I think as players, we are okay with the being in the bubble and training and preparing ourselves for the game. I think somewhere we need to do a little bit of adjustment to get the matches going. And as far as the mental setup is concerned, we did have few sessions with the sports psychologist, talking to the players. As a team, we were on calls. I think those things does help, because as seasoned players, we understand, as senior players, how to tune ourselves. But the most important thing in the current situation is the young players, or the players who are in the age groups, who have just made a debut. So for them, I think this makes even more important to sort of settle the anxiety, settle the anxiousness that they develop, thinking about their future. Because if you're a young player, you definitely want to know, I just made it into the Indian team, what is the next opportunity that I will get? So these are the questions which usually young players go through, and the sort of training facilities that they're access to. Not everybody are still access to the training facility. Some of them are lucky. I think some states have opened up, but again, not everyone are access. So again, how do you prep such young players? So that's where I think the support staff and the sports psychologists come into play to give them a lot of positivity, to keep their hopes and to keep training.
You mentioned that the Indian squad actually has a lot of youngsters, a lot of bright examples of what the future of Indian cricket will be. As a senior player, and you said that yourself, has the Zoom meetings allowed you guys to interact, for you to kind of share your knowledge, your experience with a Shefali Verma?
Well, yes, because there were times when, when you start, how do you start training after a good 4 5 months? So, as a senior player, when the facilities, like say it's rainy season in India, so it's natural that the grounds and the wickets are unprepared. Most of the ground staff are not regulars now, considering the pandemic, and it's monsoons, so you will probably not get turf wickets. So how do you train on an astroturf, and how do you utilize, if you're access to only cement wickets, what sort of drills that you can do? So these are the things that we exchange. There's WB Raman, our coach, also, like, he also gives his inputs with vast experience. That really helps for young players, because like Shefali, if she's not access to turf wickets, so she would be wondering, how long can I play on a cement wicket? So how will that preparation help me forward? So yeah, these are the things that we try to exchange, these sort of ideas. How we start after good 4 5 months of break. You can't straight away get into playing bowlers, because obviously your body is rusty, and how you slowly start with knocks, some throwdowns, and slowly graduate into playing bowlers. So these are the things that the young players can be fed, and that can help them.
Pish, I wanted to ask you a question. Having commentated on the men's game for so long and then coming into the women's game, firstly, what was your first impression? And secondly, what was the talk around your fellow broadcasters about you being involved in the women's game?
My first impressions first, well, let me start with the second part. I don't think I didn't certainly get too many comments about or questions about broadcasting on the women's game. I think there's a general acceptance that, particularly now that women's cricket has become, I suppose, a standalone and very exciting in its own right. And a lot of my colleagues now, if there is a comment now, is that, hey, that looks like really good fun to work on. We like the direction in which it's going. And for me, the adaptation to the women's game, it took some learning, understanding the limitations of men's cricket, understanding the limitations of women's cricket, the rules slightly different, the equipment, some of it slightly different. But all in all, so much of it is Lisa. So much of it is a similar relevance. The excitement of the 50 over World Cup in 2017, um, the excitement around the T20 World Cups that we've done are fascinating in its own right. So I've thoroughly enjoyed it, getting to know and understand how players have come through and what they actually go through to prepare is brilliant.
Well, one thing I can certainly attest to, you always do your homework. If you're unsure about anything, and it can be the men's game or the women's game, you're willing to ask other commentators. And I know certainly the female or the past players involved in the broadcast have enjoyed working with you because you take the care. There are a number of male commentators out there that certainly do care about the women's game, and you're one of them. So it's great to work with you, not only in the women's game but also the men's game.
Look, I enjoy leaning on the knowledge base that you, as a former champion on the playing field, a former captain of Australia of high esteem, Mel, whoever it is, and the way that you share that knowledge. Because, look, I have a growth mindset. I've always said that, so I'm willing to learn. And at the end of the day, I've got daughters as well, so I want the best for them. I've always said so. That lends my sort of empathy to all formats of the game. So it's a learning experience. It'll continue to be so, but it's been really enjoyable working alongside players like yourself, past players like yourself, broadcasters across the globe.
Claire, I wanted to touch on the governance of the game, and you're heavily involved. You're the chair of the ICC Women's Committee. So since your times in the boardroom, how has it changed from day one to now? Have we seen some positivity in that away from being into the boardroom?
So look, I'll start at home. I'll start with ECB, and the shift's been enormous. So when I've been working for the ECB now for a decade, and there were no women on the board. There wasn't one, and it wasn't independent, and it was therefore, by definition, self-interested. We now have 30% of our board members are female. I think we might be just over that now. And we do have, or we did have with Lord Kamlesh Patel, some ethnic diversity, but we need to be better in that space, as do virtually all national governing body boards in this country, as has been talked about obviously a lot recently, and is very topical in terms of sports governance, the sports governance debate, or the whole governance debate. So a huge shift, Lisa, at ECB. We've got some great independent directors, and there is also, I think, regardless of that, the actual diversity of the board, there is a much deeper understanding of the role that women's cricket can play for the whole game in terms of relevance, sustainability, engaging families, and the fact that our sport is competing with so many other sports and leisure opportunities for families and children. It is understood and accepted that women's cricket has been the biggest growth area, and there is still huge potential for growth. So that's been really lovely to witness, that sort of evolving understanding of the role that women's cricket can play and why it matters. At ICC, I would say there has been a huge shift, but it's been slower than what I've witnessed in my own country and on my own kind of committees and boards here. I think by virtue of being the chair of the ICC Women's Committee, I sit on the Chief Execs Committee as well, and I think there's been a big shift there, probably led by James Sutherland, actually, before he left as the Cricket Australia Chief Executive Officer. A huge shift there in terms of the discussion around the women's game, and a deeper understanding and commitment to investing in it. The way that the ICC board is comprised, there's 18 members on that board, 15 full members or 14 full members, 3 associate members, and 1 female independent director in Hanoi. Therefore, the discussions of those, the chairs, all of those chairs who are on that board, they're all male, and they are going to have the interests of their own organisations, first and foremost, and therefore getting independent, diverse debate and thinking and innovation around that table, whilst I can't say it from first-hand experience because I haven't sat in there, but it's going to be difficult. There's no getting away from that. I think the last 10 years have been exciting, but then if we can get governance across the whole international game better, then we are going to have some really exciting times ahead, and I hope that can happen.
Well, Ian, just to kind of highlight what Clare has been saying, World Rugby a few years ago had a landmark event where they increased the amount of council members, and all of them had to be female. The IOC have produced and are working towards a gender equality globally. Do you feel that
cricket is lagging behind?
It's hard for me to speak to that without the inside knowledge, but the colleagues that I have there are certainly, I know a lot of people who are trying to make a difference where that is concerned, and it is historically weighed in favor of males. But I think there's a move, there's an education process now being put into place, and that is where I think we have to look forward. In the Caribbean, I know there's a huge drive now to try to make women's cricket equal at the table, and we're seeing steps in that direction. It's still a long way to go, but I'm quite happy with even some of my colleagues who are not administrators, but who are broadcasters, who are starting to see women's cricket in a different light, starting to place significance, equal significance on the women's game, watching more of it, talking more about it. And this is the push forward that we need. Claire has talked and spoken eloquently about the administrative efforts being put into place, and we're right behind it, Lisa. And I think we've got to push and keep moving this and driving it forward. And it'll take some time still, but I'm happy with the pace and or certainly the direction in which it's heading.
I think, what it's going to come down to in these straitened financial times and with so much uncertainty ahead, if we're just talking about our own little cricket world, and I know that's kind of, there's so much more at play, but ultimately this comes down to the decision making about investment, both in our own member boards and at ICC level. And I would be really worried if there weren't the right voices around the tables having those debates about how we continue to carry on the momentum from the 8th of March and whatever comes, over the next 6 months or 2 years. It is going to be a challenge. There's huge uncertainty about schedules. And if the people around the table making decisions on investment and kind of the visibility of what's going to be shown, if there isn't that diversity to represent the women's game across all of those discussions, then that's concerning. And we have to really, I think, look at this whole opportunity. This is an never let a good crisis go to waste. This is an opportunity to actually say, okay, what sort of sport do we want to be? How are we going to protect and drive this? We've all identified the women's game globally as a huge growth opportunity for audience, fan engagement, commercial opportunity. So we can't now let this crisis narrow our ambition and lens on all of that, because all of that remains true. And that would be my one kind of plea, if you like, to those people sitting around the important decision-making tables, is to remember that we have got a sport here, as Bish has just said, that is growing in interest, popularity, credibility, entertainment value, commercial value. We shouldn't let that. We shouldn't forget that.
If that's there, Claire, to me, and just looking at it, not from an administrator's point of view, but from a consumer's point of view, to me, I think it's so important that the product on the field, wherever it is participated right now in the glare of the public and the media, that it is a product and entertainment that is of a high standard. That's how I see it from the outside. How do you place when England play the West Indies, when New Zealand play, when the WBBL is played again, that there's a continued high level of excellence in order to continue pushing this conversation and driving administrators?
Absolutely, and that's why we can't afford for there to be so little women's cricket, because the countries who have really developed over the last 3 to 4 years will struggle. They will struggle to keep up with the Australias and Englands and Indias if there is a void of women's cricket over the next 12 months. And we really can't afford, for the reasons you've just articulated, we can't afford for that to happen.
What was your initial reaction when the World Cup was postponed? Because you're in your twilight of your career. And what does that delay mean for you?
I remember I was celebrating my niece's birthday and I was like clicking a family picture, and there's this, it flashes on my mobile that, the T20, the One Day World Cup is postponed to 2021. So I told my dad, I said, the World Cup is postponed. So he was quiet for 5 minutes and then he turned back. He said, so what? You'll still continue playing. You'll still prepare for it. So I was like, okay. So I guess, I think it gives everybody an opportunity, an equal play field to prepare, because it makes no sense that there is few countries which are where the players are access to facilities, and there are few countries where players are still under lockdown. So I think having a World Cup in February makes no sense, and I think it is in a way, it is a right decision to postpone it and give enough time for all the countries to prepare well for the World Cup, because it's a pinnacle and we would want to have good standard cricket being played in the World Cup, because that is something everybody around the world will be looking forward to.
Now, because you're coming, into the twilight of your career, have you seen, and you've been involved at international cricket for over 2 decades, which is an astounding effort in itself. Have you seen the post-career of female players change during that time? And are you pleased with how it's going?
Well, yes, if you would have asked me way back in 2005, 2013 World Cups that, is there any, any sort of channel for women cricketers after they playing days? So I would have thought like, okay, there is nothing much other than commentary, which you, Mel, Anjum, and even Isha have done brilliantly, because I've seen the broadcasters in today's time making a conscious effort to have at least a couple of women in the commentary box, and that's a huge thing, and you guys have broken that glass ceiling of getting into the commentary box, and it is not limited to women's game. You also do IPLs, you guys do men's cricket too. So I think that's great. And I've also seen GS Lakshmi, who's the first women match referee in the ICC, who's done some of the men's game. So in that perspective, yes, it's open. Like, there have been presenters, there are ex-cricketers, ex-women cricketers who are into media in terms of writing blogs. There are various things which have opened for women cricketers post their playing days. But what I would like to look into is having more women officiating the women's game and also the men's game.
Do you feel that women's coaching, there's been a little bit of a lag? Given the professionalism of the women's game, a lot of men now have come in to coach the international sides. I mean, Lisa Kitely is probably a rarity at the moment. Do you think that's another area that can improve?
Well, it definitely can. Yes, we do have the levels for level one, level twos for women cricketers. But yes, that is something we can look into. But again, it is very important that whoever is coaching the national sides, they just have to be more competent and keep themselves up to date with the current standards of women's cricket. And I do agree for a fact that women's cricket is always trying to improve our standard by keeping the men's standard as a yardstick. So it is important that whoever the coach is, because I am not somebody who would want only the men's coach or only the women's coach. I don't look into the gender. For me, it is very important that whoever is the coach of the Indian team is able to manage the team well, at the same time gets the best out of each and every player, and to make the team play as a unit. So that is something is very, very important. And if that is if that is done well with a woman coach, why not have a woman coach on board, and why not have a woman coach coaching a men's team? I mean, we can have a very open mind. Yeah.
Claire, around the commercial side of the women's game, we've probably seen a lot of tweaks, whether it be rule changes in the T20, how many fielders are outside the inner circle. We've seen the advent of the multi-format system of the Ashes. Do you feel that there's been enough tweaks now that it should be seen as a commercial commodity, the women's game, or do you feel that there still needs to be changes made for the general public or the corporate dollars to still go, wow, okay, women's sport is going in the right direction, let's jump on board?
Well, I think that's a big question. I think the most important thing is to have a really good rationale for making change to things like playing conditions or to formats. We knew why we created the multi-format Ashes. It was to protect that one-off test. There was so little test match cricket being played in the women's game, but we wanted to protect it and create a narrative about the women's Ashes that was well received, I think, by media and fans. So I think the key is understanding, if you're going to make changes, why and what you hope to achieve by them. And part of your role, Lisa, as well on the ICC Women's Committee, is that we have an ongoing review of that kind of thing, but looking through the lens of entertainment, looking at it from the fans' perspective. Is it making it too complicated, and so on? I think we shouldn't make changes just to, if we're looking at the lens of, we've got to stop this kind of comparison between women's cricket not being as good as men's cricket. Because if you're a 6 or an 8-year-old little girl now, and you're getting into cricket really young through a young participation program, you know you're on a pathway to play women's cricket. So that little girl, if that's what she's aiming for, she's not making comparisons as to whether it's as good as or different or more, less powerful than men's cricket or whatever. So I think we have to also look at it through the eyes of the participant. And we've seen such growth in girls picking up bats and balls that I think I'm quite heartened by that. I think, the opportunity that we've got in 2022, we're hosting the Commonwealth Games. So we'll see women's cricket in the Commonwealth Games here in England for the first time. And that is certainly for our new chair, Ian Watmore, coming in at the ECB. That's a real kind of important event on the horizon for us. How do we use the opportunity to play in a multi-sport games with huge free-to-air coverage that we'll gain? How do we use that reach and that platform to, yes, drive women's and girls' cricket in this country, but also cricket more widely? Birmingham's an amazing city, huge multicultural population and interest. How do we use the Commonwealth Games for people to watch cricket, men's or women's cricket, for the very first time? So that's a great opportunity for us. And I think with that conversation about multi-sport games comes the obvious conversation is, if men's and women's cricket is ever going to be in the Olympics, would that be T10? Would that be a shorter format even than T20? Because of the number of games that you would have to have played. So that I only mentioned, you asked the question about innovation and rule, different formats and so on. And I can't see a world where you've got men's and women's cricket in the Olympics with enough pitches and enough days to factor in all of the games that you'd need with T20. I think it's still too long. So then if the ambition is to be there, how does cricket get there?
Just like throwing the curveball in there. I like it, Claire, as always.
You've seen the game develop and change over such a long period of time. Where to next for women's cricket?
Well, obviously you've spoken about Commonwealth Games, and I'm sure at some point we would be seeing cricket into Olympics. Yes, that's a little far-fetched right now, but yes, something to look forward is the 2022 Commonwealth Games, and see how cricket or how women's cricket fares in the Commonwealth. That also opens up a lot of incentives in terms of the government getting involved, because once you are recognized by the government, I think it has a far more reach for countries, for smaller countries like Nepal or say for Thailand. For these countries, I think platforms like these really help.
Thanks very much for joining us on 100% Cricket.
Thanks for having me, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks very much. Great to see you.